As we approached Langston House, however, the scene took on a different character. A throng of reporters milled about the pavement, their notebooks at the ready and their voices buzzing with speculation. I caught snatches of their chatter, curse, of the pharaohs, another Carnarvon affair, and felt that same shiver of apprehension I'd experienced earlier. Good heavens, Poirot, I said as we disembarked, it's a regular circus. What do you suppose has them so worked up? Poirot adjusted his hat with a fastidious flick of his wrist. The press, Hastings, they thrive on the sensational. A death in a noble house, an Egyptian connection, it is catnip to them. But we shall see what lies beneath the headlines. Nest CEP. We pushed through the crowd and were admitted by a stern-faced footman into the hushed opulence of Langston House. It was just past noon when we arrived, and the house seemed to hold its breath in the wake of tragedy. The entrance hall was a marvel, of marble and gilt, with a sweeping staircase that seemed to ascend into the heavens. Portraits of stern Langstons gazed down upon us, their eyes following our progress, as we were led into a drawing-room. There, awaiting us, was Lady Mary Langston. She was a striking young woman in her late 20s, clad in the sombre black of mourning yet radiating an air of quiet determination. Her dark hair was swept back from a face that bore the marks of recent strain, but her eyes, intelligent and piercing, met ours with a steady gaze. Monsieur or Captain Hastings, she said, rising to greet us. Thank you for coming so promptly. I am at my wit's end. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My uncle was not married and had no children. I was like a daughter to him, though he recently became engaged to Lady Caroline Westbrook, who remains in Egypt even now. She was always distant, more interested in his work than in him. I fear she hasn't even made the journey for his funeral, which speaks volumes about her lack of connection to our family. Uncle hosted a dinner party the night before last to celebrate his return from Egypt. Yesterday morning, he was found dead in his study. The police insist my uncle's death was a heart attack, but I know better. And now, this nonsense about a curse, it's absurd, yet the press won't let it rest. Poirot leaned forward, his interest sharpening. Dinner party, you say? And who attended this gathering, mademoiselle? Were there any notable guests or incidents that evening? Lady Mary nodded, her expression grave. There were several guests: Professor Blackwood, his academic rival, Mr. Cunningham, an American collector, Dr. Pettin from the British Museum, and of course, my cousin Gilbert and his wife, Lady Vivian. It was a lively evening, with much discussion about the artifacts, but nothing seemed amiss. Uncle was in good spirits, as always. Poirot took her hand with a gallant bow. Mademoiselle, I am at your service. Tell me all, and we shall see what the little grey cells can uncover. Lady Mary gestured for us to sit, and as we settled into plush armchairs, she began her tale. My uncle, Lord Reginald Mulvern, was an Egyptologist of some renown. 10 days ago, he returned from the Valley of the Kings with artifacts from the tomb of Pharaoh Unas, discovery he considered his greatest triumph. Among them was a tablet inscribed with a curse, warning that death would follow those who disturbed the Pharaoh's rest. The newspapers have seized upon it, especially after Lord Carnarvon's death earlier this year. She paused, her voice steady but laced with emotion. I don't believe in curses, Monsieur Poirot, and neither did my uncle. He always said such things were mere superstition. But the press has latched onto it, and I cannot shake the feeling that someone has used this curse as a cloak for murder. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in thought. Most interesting, mademoiselle. And these artifacts, they remain here. Part of the collection is here, she replied. My uncle built a gallery to house some of his treasures, though many have already been sent to the British Museum. Would you care to see it? Precisement, Poirot said, rising with alacrity. The scene of the crime, it often speaks louder than words. We followed Lady Mary through the house, and I must say, I was unprepared for the splendor that greeted us as we entered the Egyptian gallery. It was a vast chamber, its glass ceilings soaring overhead to bathe the treasures below in soft light. Display cases lined the walls, their contents gleaming with the weight of centuries. Golden amulets, alabaster jars, and weapons of ceremonial. Bronze. At the center stood the relics of Pharaoh Unas' tomb, their presence both magnificent and faintly unsettling. The cursed tableta slab of dark stone etched with hieroglyphs seemed to cast a shadow all its own. By Jove, Poirot, I murmured, it's like stepping into the past, but there's something eerie about it, don't you think? Poirot, however, was not swayed by atmosphere. He moved among the artifacts with the precision of a scientist, his eyes darting from one item to another. He paused at a case of ceremonial pins, his keen eyes noting that one was slightly askew. Before he could comment, the door opened to admit the butler, Albert, a tall, dignified figure, his face etched with the quiet reserve of long service. Lady Mary introduced him, and Poirot wasted no time. "Monsieur Albert, you found Lord Langston?" "Yes, sir," Albert replied, his voice steady but subdued. "It was 6:30 in the morning yesterday. I brought his lordship his tea, as was my custom, and found him in the study, slumped over his desk. He was cold to the touch. I summoned the doctor at once, but there was nothing to be done." "And was there anything out of the ordinary?" Poirot pressed. "A disturbance, perhaps, or anything unusual about his appearance?" Albert considered this. "The window was closed, sir, and all seemed in order. I was too shaken to notice much else." "Merci, Monsieur Albert," Poirot said, dismissing him with a nod. We proceeded to the study room of oak-panelled walls and scholarly clutter. A large desk dominated the space, strewn with papers and artifacts, while a grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner. The air carried a faint scent of cedar, and I fancied it hinted at the distant sands of Egypt. Poirot examined the desk with minute care, noting the position of the papers and artifacts. He knelt to inspect the carpet, retrieving a tiny thread, which he tucked into his pocket with a murmured "Q." I was about to ask what he'd found when the door opened again, admitting a new figure. Dr. Harold Petton was a man of middle years, his scholarly air accentuated by spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. Lady Mary introduced him as the keeper of Egyptian antiquities at the British Museum, come to offer condolences. "My dear Lady Mary," he said, though his eyes strayed to the gallery beyond, "Lord Langston's loss is a tragedy. His collection is unparalleled. If I can assist with the artifacts in any way." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You knew Lord Langston well, Monsieur Petton?" "Oh yes," Petton replied, adjusting his spectacles. "We collaborated on several expeditions. His work on Pharaoh Unas was groundbreaking." "And this cursed tablet," Poirot said. "It is genuine." "Undoubtedly," Petton said with enthusiasm. "A 5th Dynasty relic, warning of swift death to death curators, quite remarkable." Poirot murmured something non-committal, and I sensed he found Petton's eagerness curious. After the doctor departed, Lady Mary turned to us with a gracious smile. "Please, join me for afternoon tea in the drawing-room. My cousin Gilbert and his wife, Lady Vivian, will be joining us." We followed her to the drawing-room, where the tea things were already laid out on a silver tray. We had just settled into our seats when the door opened and Gilbert Ashworth entered, a handsome fellow with an air of careless charm. He was followed by his wife, Lady Vivian, whose sharp features and keen eyes bespoke a steely ambition. The air between them and Lady Mary crackled with unspoken tension. As we sipped our tea, Gilbert remarked idly, "I suppose the collection will go to the British Museum now, as Uncle intended." Lady Vivian's eyes flashed. "Surely the museum can spare a few pieces." "Mary, we've debts to settle, you know." "My uncle's wishes were clear," Lady Mary said firmly. "The collection belongs to the world, not us." Gilbert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual charm faltering. "Vivian's right about the debts, Mary. The creditors won't wait much longer. Surely a few smaller pieces could be sold to ease the burden." Lady Mary's expression hardened. "Gilbert, you know Uncle's feelings about the collection. It was his life's work meant for scholarship, not to cover gambling debts." The tension in the room was palpable as Gilbert's face flushed. "Easy for you to say you're not the one facing ruin." Poirot observed this exchange with keen interest, his fingers steepled before him. I could see his mind at work, sifting through the words for hidden motives. Tea concluded. We took our leave, stepping into the foggy afternoon. As we walked back to the flat, I turned to Poirot. "Well, what do you make of it? A curse or something more earthly?" He smiled enigmatically. "The truth, Hastings, lies not in superstition but in the facts, and the facts they begin to whisper. We shall see what they say." With that, we continued on, the mystery of Langston House unfolding before us like the pages of an ancient scroll. Chapter 2. The Pharaoh Unas. Expedition secrets of the tomb emerge. The fog had thickened as evening descended upon London, wrapping Langston House in a shroud that seemed to whisper secrets of its own. After a brief respite at our flat to consider the morning's findings, Poirot and I returned to Langton House once more. Crossing the grand threshold of that Belgravia mansion, the gas lamps flickered bravely against the gloom, casting a soft glow upon the white stucco facade, but within, the air was heavy with the weight of recent tragedy. We were shown into the drawing-room by the ever-dignified Albert, where Lady Mary awaited us. She stood by the fireplace, her black mourning gown stark against the warm tones of the room, her expression one of resolute calm despite the shadows beneath her eyes. Poirot, impeccable as ever in his neatly pressed suit and polished shoes, offered a small bow, while I managed a nod, still somewhat unsettled by the day's discoveries. "Monsieur Captain Hastings," she greeted us, her voice steady. "I am grateful for your return. I trust you've given thought to what I told you earlier." "Indeed," Mademoiselle Poirot replied, his green eyes glinting in the firelight. "The death of your uncle, it intrigues me greatly. But first, let us speak of the expedition, the journey to Egypt. Tell me all you recall of this tomb of Pharaoh Unas, as your uncle described it to you." Lady Mary took a seat, gesturing for us to do the same. I settled into a plush armchair, my notebook at the ready, while Poirot perched on the edge of his posture as precise as a metronome. She clasped her hands in her lap and began. Though I did not accompany him, my uncle shared every detail upon his return. He spoke of the relentless sun, the back-breaking labor, and the moment of breakthrough when they uncovered the tomb's entrance. The treasures within were beyond imagination: gold, jewels, and that tablet, which he regarded as a historical curiosity, nothing more. Her gaze grew distant as she continued. He described the tomb as a labyrinth of chambers, each more splendid than the last. The walls were adorned with vivid frescoes depicting Unas's journey to the afterlife, and the air was thick with the dust of millennia. But it was the cursed tablet that captured the public's imagination, though my uncle dismissed it as mere superstition, a relic of a bygone era's beliefs. I felt a shiver creep up my spine, the words conjuring images of ancient wrath. "Good Lord," I murmured. "That's rather chilling, isn't it?" Lady Mary gave a faint smile. My uncle thought it nonsense, a curiosity, nothing more. He brought the tablet back with the rest, along with photographs and notes, all of which are in his study. Poirot's moustache twitched a sign of keen interest. "This study, mademoiselle, should like to examine it more thoroughly. There may be clues we overlooked in our initial survey. The documents of such an expedition, they may hold the key to many things." "Of course," she said, rising. "Follow me." We trailed her through the house, the grandeur of Langton House unfolding around us once more. The study was a sanctuary of scholarship, its oak-panelled walls lined with books, its air tinged with a faint scent of cedar and old paper. A large desk dominated the room, strewn with maps, journals, and a scattering of photographs. Poirot moved to it with the grace of a cat, his eyes darting over the clutter with practiced ease. "Here," Lady Mary said, lifting a leather-bound journal. From the pile, his field notes. He was meticulous in recording every detail. Poirot took the journal, flipping through its pages with a reverence I'd come to recognize. I peered over his shoulder, catching glimpses of sketches, jars, amulets, and that ominous tablet. He paused at a photograph pasted into the book, a dark slab of stone, its surface etched with strange symbols. "The cursed tablet," Lady Mary confirmed, her tone matter-of-fact. Poirot studied it intently, then turned to the accompanying notes. "Swift death shall be his portion," he read aloud, his voice a soft murmur. "Most interesting. And these photographs, they are all from the expedition." "Yes," she replied. Every moment was documented. As Poirot continued examining the papers, his sharp eyes caught sight of a folded letter tucked between the journal pages. He extracted it carefully, noting the recent date and Lord Langton's distinctive handwriting. "Curio," he murmured, unfolding the letter. His eyes scanned the contents, and his expression grew grave. "Listen to this, Hastings. The scarab's provenance is dubious. The dating methods Petton employed seem flawed, and I fear he may have deceived us about several pieces. I must investigate further before the museum accepts the collection." Lady Mary's face paled. Uncle suspected Dr. Petton of deception, but they worked so closely together. "Indeed," Mademoiselle Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "It appears your uncle's trust was not absolute. This letter suggests growing suspicions about authentication irregularities." He nodded, setting the journal aside with care. "Merci, mademoiselle. This is most helpful. But now, I think we must broaden our inquiry. Tell me what of Dr. Peton? He was part of this expedition. Lady Mary hesitated, then nodded. He joined my uncle in Egypt. Yes, as keeper of Egyptian antiquities at the British Museum, he oversaw much of the cataloguing. He's lecturing at the British Museum tonight, I believe, on Egyptian burial practices. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A lecture, you say? Then we shall go to the British Museum. Hastings, mon ami, prepare yourself, we have an appointment with history. The transition from the hushed opulence of Langton House to the bustling corridors of the British Museum was a jarring one. The fog had followed us, curling round the great stone edifice as we stepped from our taxi into the evening chill. Inside, the museum hummed with activity, scholars and visitors milling about beneath the towering statues and ancient friezes. We made our way to Dr. Peton's office, a cramped room overflowing with books and artifacts, where the man himself greeted us with a mixture of surprise and guarded courtesy. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, he said, adjusting his spectacles. We meet again so soon. I must say, I didn't expect to see you here. How may I assist you? Poirot smiled, a touch of charm in his demeanor. As you know, we are investigating Lord Langton's death. Monsieur Peton, and your expertise, it is invaluable. Tell me, what know you of this curse of Pharaoh Unas? Dr. Peton's expression tightened briefly before he rallied. A fascinating artifact, the cursed tablet. Historically, such inscriptions were meant to deter to rob us, psychological rather than supernatural. But if you're truly interested, I'm about to give a lecture on the subject. You're welcome to attend. We accepted, and soon found ourselves in a lecture hall, the air thick with the scent of old wood and anticipation. Dr. Peton took the podium, his voice rising with passion as he spoke of Egyptian burial practices, the mummification rites, the amulets placed to guard the dead, the curses carved to protect their eternal rest. I listened, half enthralled, half troubled by the parallels to Lord Langton's fate. These curses, he declared, were not mere superstition to the Egyptians. They believed the Katha spirit could wreak vengeance on the living. As his lecture progressed, Dr. Peton's expertise became increasingly apparent. The ancient Egyptians, he continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone, were masters of toxicology. They understood the properties of various substances with remarkable precision. Aconitine, derived from monkshood, was favored for its swift, undetectable effects. A prick of a needle could lead to death. I felt a chill run down my spine at these words, and I noticed Poirot's eyes sharpen with interest. The doctor's knowledge of such deadly substances was both impressive and, given our current investigation, deeply unsettling. The Egyptians, Peton went on, believed that such knowledge was sacred, to be used only in service of the gods and the preservation of the pharaoh's eternal rest. They documented these methods meticulously, though much of their wisdom has been lost to time. As he spoke, I noticed Poirot's gaze fixed intently on Dr. Peton, studying his expressions and gestures. When the lecture ended, Poirot approached him once more. A most enlightening discourse. Doctor, he said smoothly, tell me, how does the museum authenticate such artifacts? The process, it must be rigorous. Dr. Peton hesitated, a flush creeping up his neck. Quite rigorous, yes. Every piece is examined by experts, myself included, before acceptance. Lord Langton's collection was no exception. And yet, Poirot pressed, there were no disputes, no questions of authenticity. Minor disagreements, perhaps, Peton admitted, his tone stiff, but nothing significant. Lord Langton's finds were impeccable, especially since I was there on site in Egypt to verify them. And who else was involved in the authentication process? Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Were there any external experts consulted? Occasionally, we bring in specialists for particularly rare pieces, Peton replied. But for Lord Langton's collection, it was primarily handled internally. Poirot nodded, but I could see the seeds of doubt taking root in his mind. We took our leave, the fog thicker still, as we returned to Langton House. There, Poirot insisted on revisiting the study, his purpose now sharper. With Lady Mary's permission, he delved deeper into the desk drawers, his fingers deftly sorting through the contents until he found a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. Correspondence, he said, scanning the pages. Listen, Hastings, dear Lord Langton. I must insist the scarab you presented is not 5th dynasty but a later imitation. And the reply, I stand by my assessment. The provenance is clear. He looked up, his eyes alight. A dispute, mon ami, most revealing. As we left the study, I could no longer contain my unease. Poirot, I said, my voice low, this cursed business, it's getting under my skin, you know. It reminds me of Lord Carnarvon's death last year. He financed the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb and died shortly after under mysterious circumstances. The press called it the curse of the pharaohs. What if there's a pattern here? He stopped, turning to me with a rare seriousness. Hastings, you are a good man, but too quick to embrace the shadows. The little grey cells, they tell me there is no curse, only human hands at work. We must trust in reason. His words steadied me, though the chill lingered. Our final task that evening was an interview with Mrs. Fairfax, Lord Langton's private secretary. We found her in the library of Langton House, a slight woman with a sharp gaze, surrounded by shelves of archaeological tomes. Poirot began with his usual courtesy. Madame Fairfax, what can you tell us of Lord Langton's recent days? His behavior, perhaps, or his correspondence? She paused, her fingers tightening on a ledger. He was troubled, Monsieur Poirot. The expedition had strained his finances, and he fretted over the artifact's authenticity. He clashed with Dr. Piton more than once, and letters, Poirot prompted. There was one from Egypt, she said, her voice dropping, from Lady Caroline Westbrook, his fiancée. It arrived days before his death. He read it, and grew agitated, muttered something about betrayal. Poirot's interest sharpened. This letter, where is it now? I don't know, she admitted. He kept it close. As we departed Langton House, the fog swallowed the streets, and I felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon me. Poirot, I said, it's all so tangled, the curse, the disputes, that letter. What do you make of it? He walked in silence for a moment, then replied, the threads, Hastings, they begin to weave together. Patience, mon ami, the truth, it will emerge. And so we made our way home, the enigma of Pharaoh Unas trailing us through the night, like a shadow from the ancient sands. Chapter 3. The dinner party reconstruction. Suspects gather. Tensions rise. The morning broke with a crispness that seemed to sharpen the senses, though I confess my own was somewhat dulled by the restless night that had preceded it. The events at Langton House, with their whispers of ancient curses and modern treachery, had left me uneasy. Yet, as Poirot and I returned to that Belgravia mansion in the late morning, with the assistance of Chief Inspector Japp, who had arranged for the guests of the dinner party to gather once more, and facilitated by Lady Mary, felt the familiar thrill of being at Poirot's side. As he embarked upon one of his meticulous reconstructions, Poirot insisted on speaking to each one individually, away from the prying ears of the others. We were shown to a small, elegantly furnished annex room adjacent to the dining hall, where the interrogations would take place. The annex was cozy yet refined, with oak-panelled walls and a single window that let in a pale, filtered light. A small table and 2 chairs had been arranged for the interviews, and I took my place beside Poirot, notebook at the ready. Poirot, ever the picture of precision, adjusted his cuffs and glanced at the police reports he had obtained from Japp. These documents contained the initial testimonies given by the guests 2 days prior. He murmured, but Poirot seeks deeper truths. He turned to me with a faint smile. Now, Hastings, we shall see what lies beneath their words. He began with Professor Blackwood, a portly man with a shock of white hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, who had been Lord Langton's academic rival. As Blackwood entered the annex room, his expression was a curious blend of defiance and discomfort. From the police reports, I see you were seated to Lord Langton's left that evening. Poirot began, his voice calm but probing. Tell me, Professor, what do you recall of the dinner? Blackwood cleared his throat, his booming voice filling the room. It was a splendid affair, as Langton's dinners always were. He was in high spirits, prattling on about his latest finds from the Unas tomb. We had our differences, of course, academic disagreements, nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, a gleam of interest flickering within them. Differences, you say? Pray, elaborate. The professor shifted in his seat, his ruddy cheeks flushing deeper. Lord Langton and I held opposing views on the significance of Pharaoh Unas's reign. He argued the artifacts proved Unas a reformer. I maintained he was a tyrant. It was a scholarly dispute, hardly a matter of life and death. Yet Poirot interjected smoothly, such disputes can grow heated. No, when reputations hang in the balance, passion may override reason. Blackwood bristled. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, My rivalry with Langston was purely professional. I bore him no ill will. Poirot inclined his head, his expression inscrutable. Of course, Professor. And during the dinner did you observe anything unusual? Any tensions, perhaps, or odd behavior? Blackwood hesitated, then said, there was that business with the ceremonial pins. Dr. Petton was quite taken with them, kept picking them up during the meal, seemed a bit obsessive, if you ask me. Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. Obsessive, you say? In what way? Precisely. Blackwood frowned, thinking back. Well, he kept examining them, turning them over in his hands, even during the courses. At one point, he nearly dropped one into his soup. It was as if he couldn't leave them alone. And did you notice anything particular about the pins themselves? Poirot asked. They were exquisite. Of course, Fifth Dynasty, I believe. But Pettin's behavior was unusual. He seemed almost nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he handled them. Poirot made a small, satisfied sound in his throat. Mercy, Professor. That is most illuminating. Next, Poirot spoke with Mr. Cunningham, the brash American collector who had been eager to purchase Lord Langston's artifacts. Cunningham entered the annex room with a confident swagger, his sharp eyes appraising the surroundings. Monsieur Cunningham, you sat across from Lord Langston that evening. What are your recollections? Cunningham leaned back in his chair, his voice a gravelly drawl. Langston was full of himself that night, going on about his collection like it was the eighth wonder. I made him an offer, a damn good one, to buy the lot. He turned me down flat, said it was all for the British Museum. And how did that sit with you, monsieur? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Cunningham shrugged, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. Disappointed, sure, but I'm a businessman. I don't cry over spilled milk. Plenty of other fish in the sea. Poirot's moustache twitched a sign I knew well. He was not entirely convinced. And did you notice anything out of the ordinary that evening? Cunningham thought for a moment. Lady Vivian was awfully curious about the money side of things, kept asking what the artifacts might fetch at auction. Struck me as a bit crass, given Langston was sitting right there. Lady Vivian Ashworth, Lord Langston's niece, by Next, her silk gown of deep indigo rustling as she took her seat. Her sharp features and keen eyes bespoke a steely ambition. Lady Vivian, perhaps you could share your own account of the evening. She took a deep breath, composing herself with visible effort. It was a delightful dinner, as Uncle Reginald's always were. He was charming, witty though, I must confess. I did press him rather forcefully about the collection's financial worth. With his engagement to Lady Caroline and Gilbert's mounting debts, I worried terribly about the family's future. These relics could secure our future. Reginald, I told him, must you hoard them for the museum? He was quite firm in his refusal, insisting they belonged to scholarship, not private gain. And did you observe anything unusual? Poirot pressed gently. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on her handbag. There was an incident with the wine, I recall. Dr. Petton seemed rather clumsy that evening. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Clumsy, you say? In what way? Well, he spilled his wine at one point. I think he was handling one of those ceremonial pins at the time. He seemed quite flustered afterward. Dr. Petton, the museum curator and Lord Langston's colleague, entered the room with a nervous air, fidgeting with his spectacles. Doctor, tell me about your interest in the ceremonial pins that evening. Petton swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. They were remarkable artifacts, Fifth Dynasty, perfectly preserved. I may have handled them once or twice during the dinner. Lord Langston was showing them to us, explaining their history. And did you notice anything unusual about the pins or your handling of them? Petton paled slightly. I may have been a bit too eager. I recall spilling my wine at one point, but it was an accident, nothing more. Gilbert Langston's nephew and heir slouched into the room with an air of bored indifference. Monsieur Gilbert, what do you recall of that night? Gilbert shrugged lazily, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Uncle Reggie was his usual self, rattling on about his finds, brushing off the cursed nonsense. I didn't pay much mind. Digging up old bones isn't my line. And your relationship with your uncle? Poirot asked, his tone probing. Gilbert's smirk widened. Close enough, I suppose. He liked me well enough, though I never fawned over him like some Mrs. Fairfax, Lord Langston's private secretary, entered last, her slight frame and sharp gaze giving her an air of quiet competence. Madame Fairfax, as Lord Langston's secretary, you must have known his habits well. What do you remember of the dinner?" Her voice was soft, tinged with melancholy. Lord Langston was in good spirits, though tired from the expedition. He was animated about the Unas artifacts as the pins. He believed they held great significance. "And any unusual occurrences?" Poirot prompted. She paused. There was a brief row between him and Professor Blackwood over a hieroglyph's meaning. It grew sharp, but they laughed it off. And Lady Vivian did seem rather fixated on the collection's worth. With the interviews concluded, Poirot and I returned to the dining room to examine the scene, but first, he insisted we consult Dr. Thornfield, who had been summoned to meet us at the house with his medical findings. Dr. Thornfield arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand and a grave expression on his weathered face. We met him in the study, where Poirot immediately inquired about the post-mortem examination. "Dr. Poirot," he began, "I understand you conducted a thorough examination of Lord Langston's remains at the morgue. What did you discover?" Dr. Thornfield opened his medical bag and withdrew a detailed report. "Most intriguing findings, Monsieur Poirot. During my examination at the mortuary, I discovered something that was initially overlooked: a mark no larger than a pinprick beneath his ear, so small it was nearly missed in the preliminary examination." "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, studying the photographs Dr. Thornfield had brought. "A wound so precise, so deliberate. This tells us much. Too precise for accident, too small for most weapons. But a ceremonial pin, perhaps with poison." He trailed off meaningfully. I leaned closer, examining the medical photographs. "Good heavens, Poirot, that's barely visible. How was it discovered?" "Meticulous examination under magnification," Dr. Thornfield replied. "The wound shows characteristics consistent with a sharp, thin instrument, possibly hollow. Given the slight bruising pattern around the entry point." He led me around the dining room, his movements precise and deliberate. The table had been reset to mimic the night of the dinner, complete with place settings and the display case that had held the ceremonial pins. Poirot paused at the case, his fingers hovering over its glass lid. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing to a faint scratch on the table nearby. "A mark, perhaps, from a hurried hand or a moment of carelessness." I squinted at it, barely discernible in the dim light. "It's tiny, Poirot. Do you really think it means something?" "Everything means something, mon ami, until proven otherwise," he replied. "Now, let me demonstrate what I believe occurred during the dinner." Poirot moved to Lord Langston's place at the head of the table, then gestured for me to observe as he recreated the scene. "Picture, if you will, the moment when someone examined the ceremonial pins." Lord Langston, proud of his discovery, would have leaned forward to explain their significance. He mimed the action, then continued. "At this moment, the murderer approaches ostensibly to admire the pin Lord Langston wore on his lapel, a matching piece from the collection, a magnificent piece. Lord Langston, allow me," and the killer's hand brushed Langston's neck as they straightened the pin, delivering the fatal prick with the poisoned tip. I watched, transfixed, as Poirot demonstrated the subtle movement, but surely someone would have noticed such an action. "Now, Hastings, consider the setting: a dinner party, with wine flowing, conversation animated, attention focused on the artifacts being passed around. A brief touch to adjust a pin would seem natural, even courteous. The perfect cover for murder." My heart raced. "And someone handled them, spilled wine. Even could they have?" Poirot raised a hand, forestalling me. "We must not leap, Hastings. But consider, aconitine from the monkshood plant could cause death. It is swift, subtler poison for the cunning." "But who'd have the knowledge and the nerve?" I asked. My voice hushed. His eyes twinkled with that peculiar blend of mischief and resolve. "That, mon ami, is what we shall uncover." Each guest had motive, each had opportunity, but only one had the precision to strike. He tucked the folder away and straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. "Come, Hastings. The little grey cells, they hum with possibility. We are close, very close to the truth." As we left the dining room, the morning light had dimmed, clouds gathering over Langston House like a shroud. I felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon me, yet with Poirot beside me, I knew we would pierce its heart. Curse or no curse. Dear listeners, as the shadows of Langston House beckon, we invite you to unravel deeper mysteries by joining Nocturnal Tales as a member. Unlock exclusive tales crafted for our most devoted, earn badges of loyalty, and wield your voice in polls to shape future stories. Plus, immerse yourself in quarterly ebooks, curated troves of suspense delivered just for you. Our first members-only episode, The Ashworth Hall Phantom, awaits a chilling narrative that grips until the final whisper. Don't let these secrets slip away. Choose your tier and join us, now link in the description. Thank you for journeying with us. Now, let us slip back into our story. Chapter 4, The Egyptian Connection. Ancient poisons point to murder. The afternoon sun cast a feeble glow through the fog that blanketed London, as though reluctant to illuminate the dark threads of mystery weaving themselves around Langton House. It was the second day of our investigation, and I found myself once more at Poirot's side, my mind buzzing with the revelations of the morning. The puncture wound on Lord Langton's neck, the suspicion of poison, and Dr. Petton's curious behaviour at the dinner party. Yet Poirot, as ever, remained a study in composure, his small frame exuding an air of quiet determination as we stepped from our taxi onto the steps of the British Museum. The day before, the interviews had left us with a tantalizing clue, the possibility that Akhenaten was the agent of Lord Langton's demise, and Poirot had declared that our next step must be to uncover its origin. The Egyptians, Hastings, he had said as we set out, they knew much of poisons. We must seek their secrets if we are to understand this crime. The museum loomed before us, its grand columns rising like the pillars of some ancient temple, a fitting stage for the inquiry ahead. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old stone and parchment, and the soft hum of scholarly voices filled the vast halls. Poirot led the way with his usual precision, navigating the labyrinth of corridors until we reached the reading room, a cavernous space lined with towering shelves and lit by the soft glow of green-shaded lamps. Mon ami, he said, turning to me with a gleam in his eye, here we shall find the wisdom of the ancients. Let us consult the texts on Egyptian burial practices. I followed him to a corner table where a bespectacled librarian deposited a stack of dusty volumes at Poirot's request. The titles alone, The Rites of the Dead, Poisons of the Nile, sent a shiver down my spine. Though I endeavoured to match Poirot's calm as we settled in, he opened the first book with the care of a surgeon, his fingers tracing the faded lines of text, while I struggled to keep pace with the dense prose. Minutes turned to hours, or so it seemed, until Poirot let out a soft exclamation. Voir Hastings' regard. He pointed to a passage, his voice tinged with triumph. Akhenaten, extracted from the monkshood plant, was known to the ancient Egyptians, not only for its use in mummification, but also as a potent poison. The texts describe how it was employed to dispatch enemies silently. Its symptoms, numbness, tingling, and a rapid failure of the heart, often mistaken for natural ailments. See Hirat notes that a mere prick with a coated blade could deliver death within minutes, leaving scant evidence save for a tiny wound. I leaned closer, my heart quickening. Good heavens, Poirot, so it's true. Someone could have drawn on this ancient knowledge to murder Lord Langton. But why Akhenaten specifically in this case? Precisement, he replied, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. Consider, Hastings, the puncture wound on Lord Langton's neck, as noted by the pathologist, a mark so small it was nearly overlooked. Then the suddenness of his collapse, with no prior illness. Akhenaten fits perfectly. It is swift, lethal in the tiniest dose, and mimics a heart attack, as the Egyptian scribes well knew. Who better to wield such knowledge than one versed in Egypt's secrets? But come, we must return to Langton House. I wish to examine those ceremonial pins once more. The fog had thickened as we made our way back to Belgravia, wrapping the streets in a spectral haze that seemed to mirror the murkiness of the case. Langton House welcomed us with its familiar grandeur, and Albert admitted us with a bow. We found Lady Mary awaiting us in the Egyptian gallery, her face a mask of concern as she greeted us. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice soft yet strained. I hope your visit to the museum has shed light on this dreadful affair. Indeed, Mademoiselle Poirot replied with a nod. We have learned much. Now, if I may, I wish to examine the ceremonial pins once more. The gallery was as awe-inspiring as ever, its glass ceiling casting a muted light over the treasures of Pharaoh Unas. Poirot moved to the display case of ceremonial pins, his eyes sharp as he studied each artifact. I watched, marveling at his focus, until he paused at one, a slender pin of gold and lapis lazuli, its tip faintly gleaming. Observe, Hastings, he said, his voice low and deliberate. This pinnet is unlike the others. See here. tip bears a faint residue, as if it had been dipped in some substance. I squinted, barely discerning the slight discoloration. By Jove, Poirot, you're right. Could it be the poison? Perhaps, mon ami, he murmured. Aconitine applied to the tip would enter the bloodstream upon the slightest prick, leaving only a tiny wound, as Dr. Thornfield found. The realization struck me like a thunderbolt. So during the dinner, someone perhaps pet this pin to deliver the poison. Poirot's expression grew grave. It is possible, Hastings. The method becomes clearer, but we must establish the motive more firmly. We adjourned to Lord Langston's study, a room I'd come to associate with the heart of this mystery. The oak-panelled walls and cluttered desk greeted us once more, and Poirot began sifting through the papers with renewed purpose. Among the expedition notes and correspondence, he uncovered a slim volume, a collection of published papers bearing Dr. Petton's name. Here, Hastings, he said, holding up a page, a treatise on Egyptian toxicology by our very own Dr. Petton. He writes of aconitine with the familiarity of an expert. I felt a chill. So he had the knowledge, and the pin suggests the means. But why, Poirot? That, mon ami, requires further inquiry, he replied. This shows he had the knowledge, but many scholars study poisons without turning to murder. Perhaps he sought to test his theories or conceal a darker intent. We must find a stronger link. His recent activities might tell us more. I suggested examining the household records. I suggested. Exactement, Poirot said. Let us examine the household records. With Lady Mary's consent, we reviewed the household records and gallery logs. Lord Langston, it seemed, had opened his collection to guests, but for security reasons, required them to sign a guest book upon each visit. The logs revealed that Dr. Petton had come frequently in the days before the murder, often lingering alone in the gallery. His access to the artifacts, including the pins, had been unrestricted. Lady Mary, Poirot asked, did your uncle ever express concern about Dr. Petton's behavior during these visits? She nodded, her expression troubled. He did mention that Petton seemed overly interested in the Pinzois, examining them closely. I thought it was mere academic zeal, but now I wonder. It's damning, Poirot, I said. My voice hushed. He had every opportunity. He agreed, but we must not overlook the others. Gilbert Ashworth, for instance, his financial desperation bears scrutiny. His debts might have tempted him to desire its sale. Contrary to his uncle's wishes, Gilbert, Lord Langston's nephew, had struck me as a charming wastrel, but Poirot's instincts were rarely wrong. Through Chief Inspector Japp's discreet efforts, we obtained Gilbert's bank records, which painted a grim picture. Debts exceeding £15,000, owed to London's gambling dens. His inheritance from Lord Langston's estate could erase them, but only if the collection was sold, a prospect Lady Mary opposed. Greed, Hastings, Poirot mused. It drives many a man to desperate acts. Yet his alibi holds for now. Our final task that afternoon was to examine telegrams from Lady Caroline Westbrook, Lord Langston's fiancée, who remained in Egypt. Mrs. Fairfax had alluded to them, and Poirot was determined to see their contents. In the study, he untied a bundle of messages, spreading them across the desk like a map of suspicion. One, dated a week prior, read, Reginald, beware of P. He is not to be trusted. Caroline. Another, sent 2 days before the murder, was more urgent. Return to Egypt at once. Trouble brewing. Do not trust P. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he read aloud. P. Dr. Petton sans doute. Lord Langston feared betrayal, and Lady Caroline confirmed it. But why? Perhaps Petton meant to steal the artifacts, I ventured. Or ruin Lord Langston's reputation, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. Possible. The pieces, they align. Yet the full picture eludes us. As we left Langston House, the fog had thickened to a suffocating veil, the world reduced to ghostly shapes. My mind churned with the day's findings, the poison, the pin, Petton's expertise, Gilbert's debts, and those cryptic telegrams. Yet the truth remained just beyond reach. Poirot, I said as we walked, we're so close yet I can't see it. Have you a theory? He smiled, his green eyes twinkling faintly. Theories, Hastings, are like this fog, shifting, obscuring, but the little grey cells, they pierce it. Patience, mon ami. The truth draws near. And so we pressed on, the enigma of Pharaoh Unas tightening its grip upon us. Chapter V. The laboratory investigation of forgery and aconitine. The late afternoon found us at the British Museum once more. the grand edifice looming through the fog, like some ancient sentinel guarding secrets of the past. The air was thick with the damp chill of October, and I pulled my coat tighter as Poirot and I approached the main entrance, where Chief Inspector Japp awaited us with a folded document in his hand. "Poirot, Hastings." Japp greeted us with a grim nod. "We have authority to search Peaton's lab. Let's see what he's hiding." He held up the warrant with satisfaction. "Took some doing to convince the magistrate, but your suspicions about the poison delivery method were compelling enough." We made our way through the museum's corridors with official purpose now, with the full weight of the law behind us, proceeding to Dr. Petton's laboratory, a cluttered sanctum tucked away in the museum's labyrinthine depths. The room was a chaotic testament to scholarly pursuits, shelves groaning under the weight of books, bottles of chemicals glinting in the dim light, and papers strewn across a scarred oak desk. The faint scent of preservation fluids hung in the air, mingling with the dust of centuries. Japp took charge of the search, his experienced eyes scanning the room methodically. "Right, then, let's do this properly. Poirot, you take the desk area. Hastings, help me with these shelves." Poirot moved with his characteristic precision, examining the desk with meticulous care. Among the scattered papers, he discovered a leather-bound ledger that seemed oddly out of place among the archaeological notes. Opening it carefully, his eyes widened with interest. "May I regard this?" he called softly. "This entry lists a scarab as 5th dynasty, yet here, in the margin, are notes suggesting experts dated it to the Ptolemaic era, a discrepancy of over 1,000 years. Japp looked up from his search of the chemical bottles. "Forgery, you think?" "More than that," Poirot replied, turning pages rapidly. "This entire ledger documents authentication disputes. Lord Langston was growing suspicious of several pieces in his collection." At length, Japp paused, holding up a small glass bottle from Petton's desk. "Draw its label clear and damning, aconitine for research purposes." A thrill of triumph coursed through me, tempered by dread, for here was the poison that had claimed Lord Langston's life. Well, Japp said grimly. "And what's this?" Tucked behind it, he withdrew a bundle of papers tied with string invoices for replicas sold to private collectors. "Petton's been running quite the side business." Poirot examined the documents with growing excitement. Aconitine labeled for research and invoices for replicas sold to private collectors. "The evidence mounts," Mies amist, "though we must not leap to conclusions just yet." We had just finished cataloguing the evidence when the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the stone halls. Japp straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward his coat. "Someone's coming. Peaton, most likely." The door opened, and Dr. Petton entered, stopping short when he saw us, his face paling as he took in the scene. The open warrant in Japp's hand, the evidence spread across his desk, the vial of aconitine gleaming accusingly in the lamplight. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carefully controlled despite the tremor beneath, "I see you've made yourselves at home in my laboratory. May I ask what this is about?" Japp stepped forward, his expression stern. "Dr. Petton, we need you to come with us for questioning in connection with the death of Lord Langston. The evidence we found here raises serious questions." Petton, composure held, though I notice his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "I'm afraid I don't understand. My research into ancient toxins is well documented and entirely legitimate. As for any business dealings, I assure you, everything is above board." "That may be," Japp replied evenly, "but the presence of aconitine in your laboratory, combined with your access to Lord Langston and the ceremonial pins, makes you a person of significant interest in our investigation." "I must protest," Peaton said, though his voice lacked conviction. "My work requires me to study various substances. That hardly makes me a murderer." Poirot observed this exchange with keen interest, his fingers steepled before him. "Indeed, Doctor, your protests are noted. However, the little grey cells suggest that all will be revealed in due course. For now, Chief Inspector Japp requires your cooperation." With Petton reluctantly accompanying us, and the evidence secured, we prepared to leave the museum. Though we had found compelling evidence, the case was far from closed. The final revelation would require one more gathering of all the suspects. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, as we emerged into the foggy London evening. "Tomorrow, we shall gather everyone at Langston House for the complete truth. The curse of Pharaoh Unas will be laid to rest not by ancient magic, but by careful deduction and irrefutable evidence." Chapter 6. The curse unraveled. Poirot exposes the killer. The evening had settled over Langston House like a velvet curtain, heavy with the promise of revelation. The fog, that persistent companion of our London autumn, had mercifully retreated, leaving the air crisp and the sky a deepening indigo, pricked with stars. As Poirot and I stepped from our taxi onto the familiar gravel drive of that Belgravia mansion, I felt a tremor of anticipation. Tonight, the tangled threads of Lord Langston's death would be unravelled, and I could scarcely wait to see how Poirot would wield his genius. Earlier that day, Poirot had been a whirlwind of activity, his small frame buzzing with purpose. After our authorized search of Dr. Petton's laboratory at the British Museum, where we'd secured that damning vial of aconitine with Chief Inspector Japp's warrant, he had telephoned Japp with a request as precise as it was urgent. "I'm Japp," he had said, his voice ringing with authority through the receiver. "You must gather all the suspects, every one of them, and bring them to Langston House this evening. We are precise men, and bring Dr. Petton under supervision. The truth, it awaits us there." And so it was that Jappiver, the practical soul, despite his occasional bafflement at Poirot's methods, had complied. Dr. Petton arrived under police escort, his scholarly composure now shattered, flanked by 2 constables as he was led into the Egyptian gallery. As we entered the house, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that seemed to hum through the very walls. Albert, the butler, ushered us into the Egyptian gallery, and I caught my breath anew at its splendor. The glass ceiling arched overhead, reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers that bathed the artifacts in a golden light. The relics of Pharaoh Unas stood sentinel, canopic jars, ceremonial weapons, and that ominous cursed tablet at the center, its shadow stretching across the polished floor like a dark omen. The suspects were already assembled, a tableau of nerves and guarded expressions. Lady Mary stood near the tablet, her mourning black stark against her pale resolve. Gilbert Ashworth lounged against a display case, his nonchalance a thin veneer over unease. Lady Vivian's sharp eyes darted about, her silk gown rustling with every restless movement. Professor Blackwood's brow was creased, his hands clasped tightly behind him, while Mr. Cunningham's brash confidence seemed tempered by curiosity. Mrs. Fairfax clutched a handkerchief, her gaze flickering between hope and dread, and Dr. Pettono, how changed he was. His scholarly poise had crumbled, replaced by a pallor and a tremor in his hands that spoke of a man teetering on the edge. Poirot stepped forward, his diminutive figure commanding the room with an effortless grace. He adjusted his moustache with a theatrical flick, then raised his hands for silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice a melodic blend of authority and charm. "We are gathered here this evening to lay bare the truth of Lord Reginald Langston's death. It was no curse, no wrath of ancient spirits, but a crime most calculated, most human. But first," Poirot continued, his eyes sweeping the assembled group, "let us establish the precise chronology of events. On October 10th, Lord Langston hosted his fateful dinner party to celebrate his return from Egypt. On October 11th, in the early morning hours, he was found dead in his study. On October 12th, Lady Mary summoned us to investigate. And today, October 14th, we gathered to reveal the truth." A murmur rippled through the group, but Poirot pressed on, undeterred. "Let us begin with the method." He moved to the display case of ceremonial pins, his fingers selecting that slender artifact of gold and lapis lazuli we had scrutinized before. He held it aloft, the light catching the faint residue on its tip. "This, mes amis, is no mere relic. It is a weapon, hollow needle designed to deliver a fatal dose of aconitine, a poison so subtle it mimics the heart's betrayal." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle, then continued with a flourish. "Imagine, if you will, the dinner party. Lord Langston, in high spirits, passes this pin among his guests. A single prick noticed amidst the clatter of plates and the flow of wine, and the poison enters his blood. The poison would work slowly, first a tingling, then numbness, spreading through his body. After the guests departed and he retired to his study, the final collapse would come within the hour, all disguised as a natural demise." Lady Mary's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with horror. "But who, Monsieur Poirot, who could have done this?" Poirot's gaze swept the assembly, lingering on each face with a piercing intensity. "A question most pertinent, mademoiselle. But first, let us eliminate those who, despite their presence at the dinner, had no cause to commit this act." He turned to Professor Blackwood, his tone measured. You, Professor, bore Lord Langston academic enmity, yet your rivalry was one of respect, not malice. To kill him would have silenced a worthy adversary, a loss you would not have welcomed. Blackwood exhaled sharply, relief softening his features. Quite so, Monsieur Poirot. I valued our debates too much. Poirot continued. Monsieur Cunningham, your ambition to possess the collection was great. Yet Lord Langston's death sent it to the museum, not your hands. Killing him would have thwarted your own desires. Poirot then turned to Lady Vivian and Gilbert, addressing them together with a softened tone. Lady Vivian and Monsieur Gilbert, your financial straits are deeply entwined. The collection, destined for donation rather than sale, offered no relief to your debts. Moreover, Monsieur Gilbert, the aid promised by Lord Langston vanished with his death, risking the estate's solvency and your inheritance. Thus, his passing brought neither of you gain. Lady Vivian inclined her head, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Precisely, Monsieur Poirot. Gilbert's smirk faded, replaced by a nod. True, I needed him to settle my affairs. Madame Fairfax, Poirot said, turning to the secretary. Your loyalty to Lord Langston was absolute. You had no motive, and your seat at the table kept you distant from the pin's path. She dabbed her eyes, whispering, he was like family to me. Poirot paused, letting the silence build like a storm gathering strength. Which leaves us, inevitably, with you, Dr. Peton. The curator's face drained of color, his spectacles slipping as he stammered. This is preposterous. I am no murderer, I am a scholar. Poirot's eyes narrowed, glinting like a cat's in the dim light. A scholar, we but one with shadows. Your expertise in Egyptian toxicology, your frequent visits to this gallery, your access to these artifacts all granted you opportunity. But it is your motive that condemns you. Peton's voice rose, shrill with panic. Motive? What motive could I possibly have? Poirot produced the vial of aconitine from his pocket, holding it up like a judge's gavel. This, doctor, was found in your laboratory at the British Museum, aconitine matching the residue on this pin. And why? Because Lord Langston had uncovered your treachery, a scheme of forgery, replacing priceless artifacts with imitations to fund your lavish tastes. Gasps echoed through the gallery, a chorus of disbelief and dawning realization. Peton staggered, clutching a display case for support. That vial could have been planted. My laboratory is hardly secure, students, colleagues. Anyone could have placed it there. And forgeries. Lord Langston's suspicions were baseless. You've no proof against me. May we? Poirot pressed, relentless as a tide. The telegrams from Lady Caroline warned Lord Langston of your deceit. He suspected your forgeries, and your new exposure loomed. Your financial records, obtained by Chief Inspector Japp, reveal expenditures beyond your means. A motor car, a watch, debts mounting. Peton straightened, clinging to logic. The pin was passed among us all that night. How can you prove it? Was I who used it? And aconitine, my studies are public. Others could have learned from them. Poirot shook his head. None, doctor. Only you had the knowledge to select aconitine, the skill to wield the pin unnoticed, down the desperation to act. The scratch on the table, the spilled wine, your nerves betrayed you. Peton's defiance finally cracked, his composure crumbling as the weight of evidence pressed down upon him. His hands shook violently as he gripped the display case. Needed funds, he burst out, his voice breaking with desperation. The debts were crushing me, my research, my reputation, everything was at stake. Langston discovered the replicas I'd been selling to private collectors, and the forged authentication documents I'd created to legitimize them. He threatened to ruin me, to expose everything to the museum board. I had been falsifying provenance records, creating fake expert certifications. The entire scheme would have destroyed me professionally and legally. The room fell silent, the confession hanging in the air like a death knell. Peton continued, his words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and fear. I thought if it appeared to be the curse, no one would look too closely. The newspapers were already writing about Carnarvon's death, about the Pharaoh's wrath. It seemed perfect, a scholar's death by ancient vengeance, rather than modern greed. Poirot's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. The curse, doctor, was but a veil you wove from greed and fear. You exploited the superstition it inspired. Yet the little grey cells, they see through such veils. Chief Inspector Japp stepped forward, his face stern. That's enough, Peton, it's over. You're coming with us. As Japp led the broken man away, handcuffs glinting in the chandelier light. Lady Mary approached Poirot, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, you've avenged my uncle's death, sparing us the lie of a false heart attack." "Thank you." Poirot bowed, his moustache twitching with quiet satisfaction. "It is my duty, mademoiselle. The truth, it must always prevail." We stepped out into the night, the air cool and cleansing after the stifling tension within. I glanced at Poirot, marveling yet again at his brilliance. Another triumph. "Poirot," he smiled, his green eyes twinkling beneath the brim of his hat. "Precisement, Hastings. The little grey cells, they never fail." And so we walked into the darkness, the curse of Pharaoh Unas dispelled at last, leaving only the light of reason to guide our path. Chapter 7. The truth, illuminated justice, prevails at Langton House. The following morning broke with a clarity that seemed to herald the end of our strange adventure at Langton House. The fog, which had clung so tenaciously to London streets, had at last relinquished its grip, and a pale October sun streamed through the tall windows of the drawing-room, casting long golden fingers across the polished floor. It was a scene of quiet beauty, yet, I confess, my heart was anything but calm as Poirot and I took our places among the assembled company. We had returned to Langton House at Lady Mary's behest, invited to share in a moment of gratitude for the resolution of her uncle's tragic fate. There, in that familiar chamber of plush armchairs and delicate china, the family awaited us. Lady Mary stood by the fireplace, her black morning gown a stark contrast to the room's warmth, her face a mask of resolute calm. Gilbert Ashworth lounged in a corner with his wife, Lady Vivian, his usual air of indifference tempered by a flicker of curiosity. Mrs. Fairfax sat primly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her sharp eyes darting between us all. Chief Inspector Japaver, the stalwart presence, occupied an armchair near the window, his notebook at the ready, his stern features softened by the satisfaction of a case resolved. Poirot, impeccable as ever in his neatly pressed suit and polished shoes, stepped forward with that air of quiet authority I'd come to know so well. He adjusted his moustache with a fastidious flick, then turned to address us, his green eyes gleaming with the light of triumph. "Mademoiselle Mary," he said, bowing slightly, "I am honored by your invitation, and your kind words of thanks. It is the duty of Hercule Poirot to restore order where chaos has reigned on, to bring peace to those who seek it." Lady Mary inclined her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "Monsieur Poirot, we are indebted to you. You have lifted a great burden from this house." Before Poirot could respond, the door swung open, and Albert entered with his usual dignity. "Lady Caroline Westbrook has arrived, my lady." Lady Mary rose swiftly, her composure faltering for the first time. "Show her in at once." Moments later, a figure swept into the room, a woman of striking beauty, her golden hair framing a face etched with grief. Lady Caroline Westbrook, Lord Langton's fiancée, moved with a grace that belied her evident distress, her eyes red and her hands trembling as she clutched a handkerchief. She crossed to Lady Mary, who embraced her warmly, and for a moment the room held its breath. "Caroline, my dear," Lady Mary murmured, "we're so glad you're here." Lady Caroline's voice broke as she spoke. "I came as soon as I could. Reginald, he insisted I remain in Egypt. I pleaded to return with him, but he said it was for my safety." I never dreamed. Her words dissolved into a sob, and she sank into a chair, her head bowed. Poirot stepped forward, his tone gentle yet probing. "Madame, your letters to Lord Langton, they were most illuminating. You warned him of Dr. Petton's treachery, did you not?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "Yes, Reginald confided in me during our time in Egypt. He suspected Petton was tampering with the collection, selling originals and replacing them with fakes. He had discovered that Petton was selling authentic pieces to private collectors, while substituting replicas in the official collection. I urged him to be cautious, but he was determined to confront the truth. He made me stay behind, saying he feared what might happen if I were near." "Voilà," Poirot said, his eyes alight with understanding. "Lord Langton knew the danger and sought to shield you from it. Your telegrams, I deduced the depth of Petton's scams and the peril they posed." Lady Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, stifling another sob. "If only I'd been here, perhaps I could have stopped it." "None," Madame Poirot said firmly. "You honored his wish and, in doing so, preserved his intent. The fault lies with the murderer alone." A heavy silence descended, broken only by the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Jap cleared his throat, his gruff voice cutting through the stillness. "A rotten business, Lady Caroline, but Poirot's got the blighter bang to rights." Poirot inclined his head, accepting the praise with his usual modesty. "It is the duty of Hercule Poirot to restore order, mon ami, and, in this case, to lift the shadow of superstition that so nearly obscured the light of reason." Mrs. Fairfax dabbed at her eyes, her voice trembling. "It's a relief to know it wasn't some ancient curse, but how cleverly it was used to deceive us all." "Oui," Poirot agreed, his tone sharpening. "The human mind, it craves the inexplicable." Piton knew that the press and the public would seize upon the curse, blinding them to the rational crime beneath. Yet truth, it always emerges for those who seek it. Lady Mary straightened, her resolve returning like a flame rekindled. "Monsieur Poirot, your words have given me purpose. My uncle devoted his life to knowledge, and I shall see his legacy honored. The Pharaoh Unas collection will be donated to the British Museum under strict oversight, to ensure such treachery never taints it again." Poirot bowed slightly, his approval evident. "A noble decision, mademoiselle. Lord Langston would applaud it." Gilbert, who had been uncharacteristically subdued, spoke up, a note of relief in his voice. "And with the estate properly managed, I can settle my debts at last. Uncle's fortune won't be squandered on my follies." Lady Mary smiled faintly. "We'll see to it together, Gilbert. His wishes will guide us." The room seemed to exhale, the tension easing as the family found solace in their resolve. Poirot turned to me, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Come, Hastings, let us take a final turn in the gallery. There is one last note to sound." We excused ourselves and made our way to the Egyptian gallery, its soaring glass ceiling now aglow with the soft light of morning. The artifacts stood as they had before, but the air felt different, lighter, free of the ominous weight that had once hung over them. The cursed tablet, once a symbol of dread, now seemed a mere relic of history, its power dispelled. Poirot paused before it, his hands clasped behind him, his gaze thoughtful. "You see, mon ami," he said, his voice low and reflective, "the danger of superstition lies not in its existence but in how it blinds us to truth. Piton wielded it as a weapon, yet reason it triumphs always." Lady Mary, who had followed us into the gallery, approached with quiet steps. "Monsieur," she said softly, "I've been thinking about what you said about how Piton used people's belief in superstition to mask his crime. It's disturbing how easily he manipulated the curse narrative to his advantage." Poirot turned to her, his expression gentle yet firm. "The true curse, Lady Mary, was greed wearing a mask of ancient wrath. Piton understood that people would rather believe in supernatural vengeance than confront the ugly reality of human avarice. He counted on that blindness to shield his crime." She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting understanding. "So the curse was real, in a way, but it was the curse of human weakness, not Pharaoh's magic." "Precisement," Poirot replied. "The ancient Egyptians carved their warnings in stone, but the true dangers have always walked among us, in flesh and blood. Reason, mademoiselle, it is our only protection against such deceptions." I nodded, the wisdom of his words sinking in. "It's a lesson for the ages, Poirot. The world's full of shadows, but with a clear mind, we can banish them." He smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Exactement, Sir Hastings. And now, with the gallery restored to its scholarly peace, our work here is done." We stepped out into the crisp morning, the grandeur of Langston House fading behind us as we walked. I felt a profound sense of closure. The mystery of Pharaoh Unas was at rest, and in its place stood the enduring light of reason. A fitting end to our adventure. Epilogue. As the fog lifts over Langston House, Hercule Poirot's brilliance dispels the shadow of an ancient curse. The murderer, Dr. Peton, stands unmasked, his greed and forgery laid bare, his use of superstition as a veil for modern treachery undone. With the ceremonial pin's poison revealed, and the true cause of Lord Langston's death exposed, the family finds solace, and the Pharaoh Unas collection is secured for posterity. Let this tale remind us that the greatest curses are those we weave ourselves, born of fear and avarice. But with reason and courage, even the darkest illusions can be dispelled. We hope this journey through history and deception has enthralled you. Dear listeners, did you deduce the killer before Poirot? Did the Pharaoh's shadow deceive you? Share your thoughts below. If the Pharaoh's deadly vengeance has captivated you, please like and subscribe to CAF Tales for more stories of suspense, Support our craft with a tip via Super Thanks by joining our membership or visiting our Buy Me a Coffee page, link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and until our next tale, may your nights be filled with wonder and your days with clarity.